everyone, and welcome to our third annual Autism Hope Summit. I am so excited about our next speaker. You're in for a real treat. His name is BobDoman, and I have known him for a couple years now. I don't even know, maybe 3, 2? I don't even know. It's been a while.
I think 3.
Yeah. 3 years now. And today we're going to be talking about understanding the role of the parent, treating the whole child, and producing better outcomes. Now, before we get started, I want you to know he is honestly a wealth of information. You better sit down, start taking notes now, because you're literally going to learn more than you've ever learned in this next hour. So welcome, Bob, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a delight to see you again.
Absolutely. I always get a kick out of talking to you. I learn so much each time. And, I think for families, wherever you are on the spectrum, whether you've, first got the diagnosis or you've been in this journey of autism for quite some time, we are constantly learning and, you're constantly growing. But before we get started, for those that haven't heard of you, which I don't understand how they haven't heard of you by now, but let's say they haven't, can we give a little bit of background of why you're so passionate about what you do?
Oh, that's a tough question. Actually, I think the answer to that is, I remember back in the 80s, I was in New Jersey seeing kids for the day and doing a seminar, and there was a reporter there from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And she spent the day, she sat in on some evals and she listened to the seminar. And back then I worked like a lunatic. I really was seeing kids 7 days a week. I'd start at 7 in the morning, finish at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And she asked me at the end of the day after sitting in, why I did that. And I don't know that I ever asked myself that question until she did. And the answer I gave her is still the answer I give today, which is I really don't know a whole lot of individuals who have done anything really significant to change their lives. But I've been in a position to change lives every day. And if you can do that, how do you not do that?
Absolutely. Now let's tell people where you work and what you founded. I mean, to me that, and actually we were talking about this before we started the interview, and I think this would be a great introduction. Let's start with your website, because I think just that alone will tell them how long you've been doing this.
So our website is nacd.org.
Mm-hmm. 4 letters, guys. I just want you to understand that, that's unheard of. That's how long they've been doing this. But go ahead. And what does that stand for?
The National Association for Child Development. And I formed NACD back in 1979. We're now an international organization working with kids from virtually all over the world. I just got back from 3 weeks in Europe seeing kids. We work with a full range of children, from severely brain injured children up through kids on the spectrum, Down syndrome, learning disabilities, up to gifted and talented. And if you will, essentially, we work with individuals and help individuals achieve their innate potentials. And to a large degree, we ignore labels and focus on individuals. And working with a broad range of children and adults, it really helps us develop a great perception of what is and where pieces are associated. For example, I've been working with kids on the spectrum since 1969, okay? And things I've learned from kids on the spectrum have helped give me insights into typical kids and actually how to accelerate development. So it's very important, and unfortunately, most people in the field work with a narrow range of individuals, and it's difficult to maintain a good perspective and be able to work with the gestalt when you're only working with this narrow range and you're seeing the same thing day in and day out. So
it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's where I think a lot of people get that misconception of, this idea, I guess, or of you know, child has autism, this is what you have to do. And it's like this cookie cutter kind of thing. And I don't know about you, but you know, how many kids you've worked with thousands, and I guarantee you they're all been different.
I'm not sure what the number would be. We typically are working at any given time with about 350 kids on the spectrum. So, think about that over 40 years. Mm-hmm. I'm comfortable saying that we have never designed the same program for two kids. Okay. Because when you're working with the entire child, which is what we do, and working with the family as we do, no two kids are the same. Their needs are all different. Their needs within their families are all different. And the more specific we can be, and the more targeted we can be in what we do, the better the outcomes.
And I think that's important for all the families watching and listening, is that our children are so unique. And even where they're going to be today doesn't mean where they're going to be tomorrow. So you're constantly changing things around within the programs that you develop.
Yeah, a significant point you just made is, they're not going to be the same tomorrow if we do the things to change it. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, unfortunately, across the board that limits development and potential are the labels and all the baggage that comes with the labels. To most of the people on the planet, you say the word autism or autism spectrum, it immediately associates that label with limitations. Mm-hmm. And the perception, if you're approaching your child with a perception of your child being limited, all right, your vision is going to be limited. The opportunities you then provide and your expectations are going to be limited. And guess what results you get? Limited.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something that you said to me years ago, a few years ago, and I use it all the time. I don't know if I give you credit for it all the time, but I definitely use it all the time. You said to me that a child is capable of limitless growth, and that is something that is stuck within me. I say it more times than I can count within a week even. I say it to almost every potential partner that we get. I say it to every time I'm doing an interview. It's something that I think for any parent listening, just thinking of that, a child is capable of limitless growth at any age. And to me, that just stuck with me, and clearly it's never left my mind.
It's absolutely true. The foundation of my work has been neuroplasticity. Tragically, there's some people out there acting like neuroplasticity is something that just got created, a few years ago. Neuroplasticity has been known since the 1800s. It unfortunately hasn't been applied and hasn't been understood. And if you understand neuroplasticity, you understand that we have unlimited potential. It's part of the reason why I work with a broad range of individuals, because I personally believe that we need to not only help bring those who are struggling up so that they're functional, but we also need to bring those who are doing okay and help them be exceptional. And I'm worried about the planet and the future, and we need better brains than we've got walking around the planet today to solve the problems today. Interesting enough, some of those better brains were brains that were labeled as being autistic at one point in time.
Wow, yeah. Well, and so let's talk a little bit about, I know that one of the things that we talk about a lot is processing. And before we get into some of the other things I want to talk to you about, I think it's important for families to understand that our children's brains, they process at different levels, but they also have different ways to be able to grow their processing capabilities, correct?
Yes. And, I might restate that in terms of they have, as opposed to we have.
Everybody has.
Okay, the means to grow that. One of the issues with the kids on the spectrum is that when you slow down normal development, you modify normal development. And some very apparently minor things become very, very significant. Let me give you an example. Uh, again, I've been working with kids on the spectrum since, 69.
Yeah.
I was part of the original team that discovered that there was a sensory basis to the kids. And I keep learning things constantly. And one of the, relatively recent ahas was understanding that most kids who have a developmental problem and the initial development is slow, they miss a very important step. If we look at a typical child, by the time they're babies, we start showing them things and naming them. And we get picture books, and there's an elephant, and there's a tiger, and this is a horse, and here's your cup, and right? And then what happens with that typical child, their brain starts learning all these things have names, and the name is significant. And at that point, they start becoming the pain in the neck little kid who says, what's that, what's that, what's that, what's that? Because we've taught their brain that things have significance if they have a name. And they're not as significant if they don't have a name. And virtually every child who has a developmental problem slows down that initial development. They miss that what's that stage. And what happens with that is rather than their brains looking and being aware and present all the time, trying to understand what is that, the brain learns to ignore most of what's in their world. That's why one of the big issues with kids on the spectrum is they tend not to be present. I think when you walk through your living room, your brain names everything you see with the complexity your brain can name it. Your brain may process 10,000 pieces of information in 2 minutes as you walk through that room. For a child who the only things they can name in that room is there's a table and there's a chair and there's a lamp and there's a window, they just process 4 pieces of information rather than 10,000 pieces of information, right? Your brain is constantly present because your brain has learned that there's complexity to things. All right, so one of the biggies with kids on the spectrum is not being present. If you're not present, you're not learning. You're not processing. So the things that would typically drive that processing ability are not there. So we have to do and institute a lot of different methodologies and techniques to re-educate their brain and teach their brain, hey, be present. All right, these things all have names, they have complexity. All right, and if you will, wake up that brain.
Yeah, and I love that. And one of the things that I know that we've worked on, good and sometimes didn't work so well for us. And then we went back to you, and I know I need to keep going back to you because that's as a parent, guys, I'm gonna always tell the stuff I mess up on. I sometimes get very tired and a lot of really busy, and then Bob and other people will be like, Kristen, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and that's why it's important to have your team, behind you, kind of kicking your butt when you need your butt kicked. And, but I know that I want to talk a little bit about the number sequencing as well, because when I try to explain this to people, and I try very often, very much, to explain processing, and I'll say, you remember when we were kids and you memorized everybody's phone numbers, right? Anybody watching right now, tell me how many phone numbers you actually know by heart still, other than maybe your own. Because often, put it this way, I have a new office number, and I'm having the hardest time just remembering my new office number. I'm constantly having to I've actually called it to see when the receptionist answered, okay, good, this is my number. I wanted to make sure. Because we're just not having that same type of memorization the way we were. But let's back up, and why is that important, Bob?
Okay. If you will, the foundation of cognition. All right, cognition is a term that essentially means the ability to think and complexity of thought. Your cognition determines how well you learn, how much you learn, your complexity of thought, and where you function and your maturity. All right, that's rather significant. The foundation of cognition is sequential processing. And part of that sequential processing is short-term memory, working memory, and executive function. Okay? The typical way you simply measure processing is auditory processing, which is how much you process of what you hear, visual processing, how much you see. It's typically measured in digit spans. All right? So if I took a typical 5-year-old, and said to him, Johnny, repeat these numbers: 2, 1, 7, 3. And Johnny could repeat 2, 1, 7, 3. Say, okay, Johnny, you've got an auditory digit span of 4. All right. If I gave him a 5-digit sequence and he do 5, he has a 5. He had a 6, he's 6. The average 5-year-old is going to be about 4 or 5 digits. His complexity of thought, his language function, is a reflection of that degree of processing. When he was 3, maybe that processing was a 2 or a 3. And when he was 1, that processing was probably a 1. All right. The average adult is about a 7. Okay. So if we're looking at a 1-year-old, and we say, okay, the 1-year-old can process one piece of information. My 1-year-old granddaughter, I could say, Ari, touch your nose, and Ari could touch her nose. Okay. I say, Ari, touch your nose and your ear. All right. On a good day, because she's smart, maybe she touch her nose and ear. Okay. All right, that's a 2. Okay. And processing at a 1, the expectation is you get single words coming out. When we start getting 2s, we get a lot of single words with meaning, and we start getting couplets. The kids start putting 2 words together and 3 words together. When they become a solid 2, the complexity of thought changes and the behavior changes. 1-year-olds are a little easy to get along with. Okay, my little granddaughter, she's generally happy, and you give her something, she's happy. You take it away, it's not a big deal. Except now, as she's getting more into 2s, it is a big deal, because her complexity of thought is now I want or don't want, and I'm going to throw a fit if I don't get it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, if you're processing 2s and are in terrible 2s when you're 2 years old, that's not a big deal because you only weigh 20 pounds. All right, and you're a little munchkin. And mommy can pick you up and put you in timeout. Mm-hmm. All right. When we get to 3s, when the kids can sequence 3s, we get more language. They start putting 3, 4, initial 5 words together. The complexity of thought changes, and we get into what I call lock and block behavior, which essentially, if the child's perception is, this is fun, this isn't important, it's non-threatening, I'll do it. If this is work, if this is threatening in any way, I'm not sure what's going on, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to lock right up on it. Okay? Now, again, if that's happening with a child who's 3 years old going on 4, we can get through that without a lot of difficulty because there's not a lot we need to make them do. Mm-hmm. However, if you've got a teenager with hormones at this 3,
I don't know what that would be like.
it's called big trouble. Uh-huh. Big trouble, because you can't reason with them yet. Mm-hmm. All right, and if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. Mm-hmm. And you can't just physically pick them up and make them do it. Mm-hmm. Right? When we get that sequencing up to a 4, we can really start reasoning. When we get it to 5, we've got somebody who's very manageable, who's got initial conversational language. They understand most of what we're saying. So this is a big deal. And we need, one of my missions is across the board, whether they're talking about kids with special needs or typical kids, to start perceiving kids relative to their processing and not their chronological age. So chronological age is kind of meaningless, mm-hmm. Right? But where your kid is you 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 10. That's a really big deal, and that dictates how we need to talk to them, what they can understand, how we need to treat their behavior. It's huge. And building that processing, building that short-term memory, all right, is huge. The short-term memory, which is like that 4-digit span, is the foundation of what's called working memory. Working memory is complexity of thought. If you will, we can simply test working memory by a reverse digit span. You know, I say 5, 2, 1, and you say 1, 2, 5. Okay, reverse. And that essentially tells us the complexity of thought. And then working memory is the foundation of what's called executive function. Executive function, if you will, are those attributes we give to an adult. You have the ability to prioritize. You have the ability to inhibit yourself from doing things you know you shouldn't be able to do. You know, you're organized. All those things that permit us to function well. And again, if we're talking about a typical kid, a kid with a learning problem, a kid with ADHD, a full-blown autistic child, what is significant in terms of understanding them and where we need to take them is where they are on this continuum. That is foundational, and it's huge, and it's something that is almost universally being ignored.
Absolutely.
And
So
because,
about it then, Bob?
you know, if the world isn't working on developing this foundation, all you're getting is bigger kids with a few more skills. All right, you're not foundationally changing them. You're not foundationally helping them develop. They're just getting bigger, and if you're successful, you're teaching them how to put their socks on and teach some specific skills. But you haven't foundationally changed their ability to understand, to think, to communicate, and function. But when you understand the pieces and you work with the pieces, there really are no limitations on where you can go.
So no matter where somebody's at right now, I know people are watching going, okay, well, my child's 13, my child's 22, my child's 5. Clearly, if your child's 5, you're probably thinking, okay, great, I want to start this. But what I see often is the children that are older, the parents tend to think it's not possible if maybe they're at a 2 or a 3 span. In your experience working with somebody that's, 16, 20, 30, what's your success on that when a family's been given the proper tools, to customize a plan for them?
Without a doubt, being able to start with the kids when they're young. I mean, to put that end in perception, 3-year-olds who are, if you will, severely autistic. We've had those kids who, by the time they were 12, no one would have ever guessed they had a problem. All right, we can address their sensory issues, their processing issues, and they're good. Once we get hormones involved, without a doubt, it becomes a whole heck of a lot harder. But, it doesn't make it impossible. It just makes it harder. It's more difficult. And if we understand that incremental changes are foundationally significant changes, for example, if let's say, a child's at a 3, moving from a 3.0 to 3.1 to a 3.2 to a 3.3 is significant neurologically and globally. So, it's tougher, it's more incremental, but you can do it. And if you will, you have to do it.
There's no choice.
No, I mean, if we're not working on those pieces, nothing is happening to neurologically change. Teaching the child another skill through behavior modification isn't going to produce neurological change.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about, and I love because honestly, when I first met you and I started learning about that whole kind of thought process of learning about processing and what the importance of that was, I never thought about it before. It wasn't something that ever even entered my mind. I didn't even understand that as a, for lack of a better word, a protocol, right? And so now let's talk about that whole child, because I feel like you know, at least for me as a parent, you know, I joke often as I want to throw everybody in one room and make you all fight with each other, because it's like you go to a doctor and they tell you this, you go to the therapist, they tell you this, there's just so much, and yet everybody has an opinion, but nobody's there at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
So, you know, let's talk about the whole child, because it really is a treatment for the whole child, not just one little aspect.
You know, we all need parents. And if you will, parents are the experts on their children without a close second. Okay. You know, we as an organization in ACD work with the whole child, which means the foundation is working with the parents who we understand as the real experts on their kids. We help the parents create the vision of where we're going. And then we look with all the pieces of the child. All right. You typically have a child on the spectrum. You know, they've got a primary care doctor. They might have a pediatrician. They might have an ENT. They might have some doctor working with their vision. They may have somebody working with their hearing. And they've got an OT or two, a PT or two, a speech therapist or two, a behavior therapist, a music therapist, a few special education teachers, all right? Every one of them is working with a piece of that child. None of them work with the whole child or understand the whole child. So guess what each of their priorities is? Their piece, okay? Every one of them, their priority is their piece. And that doesn't work, all right? Because you've got to be able to look at the whole child and say, okay, as of this moment, our priorities are this, this, and this, not these other 50 things. All right, there are only so many hours in the day. There's only so many things we can focus on. And truth is, there's only so much we can ask of the child in the day.
So it's so much energy a parent has too.
Yeah, the parent has, it's the energy of the parent, but it's, you know, it's having a game plan that works. As an example, one of our families recently sent me a video. We have a portal where our parents can all put up videos for us to review and react to. And this was a teenage boy on the spectrum. And he was at school, he's part-time in school. Truth of the matter, I'd rather he were home. But and they were teaching him to load a vending machine with bottles. Okay. And he was doing that. He was doing a good job of that. And the reason the mom sent me the video was because the OT who happened to be there was concerned that he wasn't using his left hand as much as his right hand, and wanted to do a bunch of activities to improve the function of his left hand. Okay? Now, the significance of that is, number one, he's right-handed. Number two, there's nothing wrong with his left hand. Number three, we've got a bunch of important priorities to work on with this child. Right? And the last thing he needs to do is spend part of his day doing exercises with his left hand that he doesn't need. Okay? But that's what the OT does.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what she does. So she was looking for something that she could do.
Her little checkoff box.
Yeah. So it's not only unnecessary, it's harmful, because we can only prioritize so many things. We can only emphasize so many things. We can only ask so much of the child in a day before they're going to say, hey, no more, I'm not doing this. Right? So it's so vital that parents are the foundation. Parents can see the big picture. You know, parents get, for example, one of the very common issues that delays language development is middle ear fluid. Okay? Common problem, which, by the way, sadly, the primary cause of that is dairy products. But a parent can be aware that the child is having some earaches and some ear problems. And if the parent is aware of that, they can follow up with an ENT or direct that. Speech therapists have worked forever trying to improve language with kids who can't hear properly. Okay. But they're not looking at those pieces of hearing properly.
You're not even thinking that there could be fluid. Like, you don't go to that first. Like, let's go get your ears checked.
Yeah.
Let's get,
Yeah. Or if you will, if your child, if, heaven forbid, were to have seizures, a neurologist perceives their job if a child is having seizures is to stop the seizures.
Mm-hmm.
And they will attempt to medicate the child to the point where they stop their seizures.
Mm-hmm.
The neurologist generally doesn't ask about the overall function of the child. Okay? They can't do that in their 3-minute appointment. Mm-hmm. Right? They're looking at the EEG. Right? But working in isolation, they can medicate a child to the point where perhaps they've decreased the seizures, perhaps they've even eliminated the seizures, but they've slowed down the neurological function to such a degree that there could be no development.
So that's the side effect. So it's almost like you get no seizures, and you get this, now you get nothing.
Yeah, so that all has to be balanced.
Yeah, everything comes with a price.
And the parent is the one who, again, knows the whole child, who can say, hey, doctor, I appreciate that, the seizures are maybe a little better, but Johnny's walking around in a daze all day. Mm-hmm. And we can't teach him anything. So, it's critical that the foundation when we're working with any child is seeing them as unique. Forget the label. See them as whole individuals. See the parents as the experts on the whole individuals. See the parents as the ones who can create the vision, given some information and support. And then everybody needs to work under that direction and those priorities that fit the vision.
Absolutely. And I think that as you're talking, because I'm thinking about Jackson, my own son, and it's interesting because you're totally right. You have this person, this therapist only saying this about this person. The doctor's job is only to care about this. The dentist is only to care about this. It's like, but wait a second. There's a whole bunch of little pieces now of my son, but they're not all even getting together anymore. It's like, it's almost as though you take a 100-piece puzzle, and you all put it together backwards, upside down. Your pieces aren't even connecting. Yes, the whole child's there. He's in front of me, but nothing's fitting together right anymore.
Yes.
So that's how I feel.
Yes. No, absolutely. And we always have to have priorities, and we have to be constantly modifying our priorities based on where everything is. One of the things, the structure with which we work with kids, we see the kids and the families every 4 months. With the parents' help, we do a new assessment to see where the kids are. We design a new program with priorities, and we're constantly modifying those priorities because fortunately the kids are changing. If the kids aren't changing, we're really screwing up, okay? Which is important to perceive. The job is to help the child, help change the child, and if we're not doing that, we're not doing the job.
Now let's talk first a little bit about I know we talked a little bit about it, but the NACD program, it is a home-based program. For those that are listening, because I know last year we hit over 160 countries, and what is so great about this program is it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can actually implement this program right away into your home. And I love that. And it also gives more back to the family, because NACD will talk to you. They'll talk about the needs of the child. And as Bob said, they customize this program. And not only do they customize it, it's ongoing. Like, you have a person that you can contact every day of the week for the most part. Like, you can email them, and there's that's your point of contact. And it's super easy if you say, hey, this is what's happening. I'm a little confused about this. Or, hey, Johnny's doing this now. We need help with X, Y, and Z. And I don't know about anybody that can say somebody's at your fingertips 24 hours for the most part, every day. Granted, 2 o'clock in the morning, they may not answer your email, but probably by around 9 or 10 in the morning, you'll get a response, So I want to talk a little bit about, what that means and your targeted developmental intervention programs that you have, because I feel like today, many of us are, I personally, I can say this to everybody, I've never been in an IEP meeting. We've always homeschooled my son. But I've been in pre-IEP meetings, which told me I never wanted to be in another one. And so that was but that's me. Everybody's different, as we're talking about custom, programs. But I do know a lot of friends that are in these IEP meetings, and it's like once a year for the most part. And that's their day to customize everything for the whole year. And think about us as individuals. I'm not the same as I was last year. I do wish I fit into my jeans like I did last year, but I don't at the moment. They might be a little snugger, right? So I think we all change throughout the time, and that's why it's so important to have this program. But anyways, I want you to talk about, let's talk about what NACD is, talk about the targeted developmental, like what that basically means is it's really targeted, for these children. And what does a typical program, really look like?
Okay, well, let me go back to neuroplasticity.
Okay.
To trigger neuroplasticity, we need to supply the brain with specific, appropriate input with sufficient frequency, intensity, and duration. Okay? The more specific we are, the greater the impact we have. To give you an analogy, if we have 30 children in a math class, we in truth have 30 children with 30 different levels of function in math. Okay? And the teacher's job is to teach those 30 children. So you've got one child who's here, one who's here, they're all over the place. But the teacher has to pick where they're going to teach. All right? Truth is, they maybe are targeting reasonably well 4 or 5 of the 30. Okay, it's not efficient. All right, if I have that child and I'm homeschooling, for example, and he's here, his sweet spot is right here. It's not here. It's not there. It's right there. And if I'm hitting that sweet spot, I very possibly can advance in math a grade level every 2 or 3 months in 10 or 15 minutes a day, okay? Because it's specific and it's targeted and I'm hitting him right at his sweet spot, right? So globally, if you will, with neuroplasticity, whether we're talking about building the child's processing, which we discovered, normalizing visual issues, hearing issues, motor issues, in every little area, ultimately it's the brain we're changing. And the more specific and targeted we are, the more effective we're going to be. Right? We have today over 3,000 different specific techniques and methodologies we use. Wow. And it's a rare week that we don't come up with something else or discover something else. Right? And our job with every child, and every one of my evaluators know, the job is to be specific for that child on that day at that time and to constantly modify it. You talked about the communication we have with the families. A big reason for that level of communication is to be targeted and stay targeted because things are going to change. All right. And if they're not changing, we're doing something wrong and we have to modify what we're doing to produce change. If you will, we don't accept anything but success. And the reason we don't accept anything but success, if you really understand neuroplasticity, it's always possible. And if you're not producing change, you're doing something wrong or many somethings wrong. And a huge part of my frustration with the whole field is they accept failure. I walked out of graduate school in disgust. At the time I was going supposedly what was the best graduate program in the country for special needs kids. Part of the policy of the department was if I presented a paper, the professor was supposed to stand in front of me and dismiss the class and not permit any questions. Because even back then, I understood neuroplasticity and I understood the possibility for change. And just the perception that you can produce change was unacceptable.
Wow, that's scary.
If you will, I got in trouble with the state of Pennsylvania way back when for, if you will, educating trainable children. Okay? You know,
if we don't have people like you on our side cheering for us, that means we have these other people that are in the stands saying, you know what, I'm coming to the game, but I already know you're going to lose. But I bought the ticket to go to the game, but I'm not even sure why I'm here because no matter what, you're going to lose the game. Yeah. I mean, what's the point? Like, that doesn't even make sense to me.
Yeah, it's so sad. But, you know, if you will, if you still look at what's happening in the field and they're discussing whether it's a learning problem, dyslexia, ADHD, autism, whatever, the foundation of what they are teaching you is what those individuals can't do and what the limitations are. And the perception of providing an appropriate opportunity for them, the perception is an appropriate opportunity is defined by their limitations. Okay. How is that going to produce anything but failure?
Already. So what's the point of them coming? Like, think about this. If you have a child that's nonverbal, doesn't look, stims all day, maybe he's not toilet trained, isn't sleeping well. Okay, I just want you to think about limitation, 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 limitation. So now you're already telling me, I already know what my kid can't do. So I'm not actually sure why you're telling me this. I live it 24/7. Yes. I want you to tell me, how can I help him go to the bathroom on the toilet? How can I help him have better eye contact? How can I help him have speech? I don't need to know all the can'ts. I need to know how we can change the cans into cans.
Yes, yes, yes. And every one of those things you mentioned, you know, there are specific pieces you would have to look at that are not permitting that child to do that function, gain that level of function, that are neurologically based, not skill-based. You know, it's so sad that most of the kids in the spectrum, what they get today is 1950s behavior modification. You know, sorry, you know, I mean, you know, I learned that way back when and understood the huge, huge limitations of it, and it was doing nothing to address the foundational problems of what is broken. But it's still the primary thing that most of the kids are getting.
And is there a reason for that? Is it because that they just don't want to think outside the box, or is it because it makes money for them? I mean, this is what I always think. I go to an evaluation for whatever it is, and often I'm paying money out of my own pocket. You know, maybe I'll get it reimbursed by insurance. Half the time, no, or more than half the time, no. And yet I go there and they ask me a lot of questions, right? The same kind of questions that all these parents there, everyone right now that's watching this is shaking their head like, yeah. They ask all these questions and then they go on to tell me, okay, so he has autism and he's not really doing this, this, and this. I just paid you money to tell me something I already know. Like, I don't need to pay money for that. Well, what do you want to do? What do you mean, what do I want to do? Aren't you the expert? Like, I came here and gave you money. You're supposed to make it easier for me. And I can promise you, there's so many people watching this right now, and all of us have gone for this. And so why aren't they coming up with new stuff? Like, why aren't they saying, you know, this is what we can do to treat this. This is what we can do to treat that. This is, you know, let's look at this first so we can help this first. And by helping this, this will help that. You know, I know when I go to you, that's what you tell me. So I don't understand why the rest of the world hasn't caught up.
You know, they're hung up largely, the professionals are hung up largely on perceiving their job as labeling or making a diagnosis. You know, back early in my career, one of the things I did is intern with a clinical psychologist. And what she was teaching me to do was do a full psychological workup on a child. All right. And I would look at these psychological workups, and I still, unfortunately, get them today. with new families that come in. And it's hours and hours and hours and hours of testing and hundreds of scores. And at the end, they come up with a label or two. And after 20 pages and thousands of dollars, at the end of the report is a little label that says recommendations. And the recommendations are generally like 2 sentences. Have Johnny sit at the front of the class and give him more time to take his test. You know, please, okay? You know, what is the purpose of all that nonsense? All right? So that if the perception is to label, to categorize, and then provide appropriate opportunities based on that, that's what they do. If the perception is, hey, I understand neuroplasticity. I understand that everybody walking on this planet has potential. And our job is to provide them with a specific, appropriate input, opportunities to help them achieve that potential. That's an entirely different mindset, and it has not even begun to permeate the field.
Absolutely, and that's why I always love talking with you, because I know this by learning it from you. However, it's always a great reminder, and I want to talk about, you know, you guys have this, you know, how big is NACD's toolbox? You talked about there's 3,000 different combinations of X, Y, and Z, you know, but how do parents play a role in that, and how do they get help when they're coming to you saying, you know, I really want people to walk away from this knowing, like, this is something that all they have to do is go to the website, right? They fill out an application, or it's really easy, by the way, guys. And I'm going to say this as a parent. We get so many things thrown at us. Please fill this out. Please fill that out. By the end of the day, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I've already filled this out like 27,000 times. Why do they keep asking me for this? This is a super simple one. So you go, you fill it, just the basic, you know, kind of stuff. And then somebody will send you a packet, and then you fill that out just to kind of get a better idea of who your kid is. And then you get to typically meet Bob. It might take a little bit of time, but if not, he does like these cool video things. And let me just tell you, it's like, out of everything you've done, and I'm telling you, I've done a lot of different stuff. I've clearly not done everything, but I've done a lot. And it's one of the easiest processes that I personally have ever gone through with my son. And I say that because a lot of times people go, oh, I'm too tired. I'll get to it next week. Oh gosh, I just know it's going to be another 5,000 pages. I don't want to do that again, you know? And here's the cool part. So you do all that, and then you really don't have to fill out anything else ever for the most part again until 4 months, other than answering some questions like, how is he doing? And, you know, they give you these really cool, what I call like worksheets. And in the worksheet, there's like different activities that they've customized for your child. And here's the thing I also will say, because I am a type A personality, if you know me. And so when I first got these worksheets, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much I'm supposed to do, right? But here's the thing, they already know you're not going to do all of it. So they give you a good percentage of what they're hoping that you're going to do. And I say that so you all don't freak out. And then what's really cool about it is, for me, I started learning things about my own processing. I started learning things about my own ways that I was learning. And then I could see Jackson, you know, soaring in different levels. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of a background. Jackson, and I said this last summit, so if you watched last or listened to last summit, you heard me say this, but I got to say it again because it's so awesome. So we were trying so hard to get Jackson to learn how to add. And I can't even tell you, you know, how many different techniques. If you know me, you know I'm bubbly. I'm almost like a little cartoon in the room. I try all these different techniques. My background is elementary education, and one of the things I studied, you think I could teach my kid how to add 1 + 1. Yeah, I couldn't. And Bob comes in, and some of the ideas you're like, how come I never thought of that, right? Like, it's one of those moments. And so he gives us this technique, how to use a magnadoodle, and oh my gosh, my kid can add now. And it's really cool. And, you know, even things of, and this might not sound like a big deal to a lot of people because my son's now just turned 16 last week, but it's a really big deal because they told me he would never be able to do that, you know? And then the other thing, which is even a bigger deal, is that he could read, you know, basic words, never prior to this, but after this. And maybe he could say the stop sign and, you know, words he might recognize, but never really in a book. He can do a basic book, totally basic, for early reader beginners. I cried so hard when we got through like the first 2 pages, and it might have just been 4 words on this page, 3 words on that page. But Bob gave us techniques on how to implement, like how we could help them learn how to do this. And so you might have done everything you thought under the sun, because I promise you that's what I thought. And all of a sudden they start giving you these great ideas. And we've hit road bumps and whatever, speed bumps, whatever you call it, bumps. And it's been this like roller coaster thing, but they've been there this whole time and they're in the stands cheering for you. Not like the other people. They're like, well, we're probably not going to win the game. They're like, no, we're going to win this game. Get up, do it, let's go. And so anyways, I just wanted to kind of give I don't work for them. I don't get paid by telling you any of this. They don't give me a special discount, nothing like that. I am here because I'm super passionate and, every child's different, but I want you guys to know your options that are out there. So anyways, I want you to talk about, now that I said all that, but I just think it's important because, there's a lot of parents out there that are like me, that we've gone through a lot. So let's talk about this toolbox of different stuff and what that means.
Yeah. So essentially, the process, and thank you. That's a great intro to the whole deal. An assessment, if you will, is 90% the parents telling us about their kids, because again, your kids, and 10% are observations of the kids. And then we look at all the different pieces. We look at all the sensory channels, all the issues that may be involved in the sensory channels, which is kind of foundational with the kids on the spectrum. We look at the full breadth of their health issues so we can help the families kind of identify where we may have underlying foundational health problems that need to be addressed. We look at where their processing is. If they're at a level, we look at where they are academically. And then, if you will, we design a program to address those pieces with priorities. All right, so emphasis swings here, and then it swings there, and it swings there. For example, we talked about the processing. Often, we're kind of stuck developmentally because we don't have enough processing power to move to that next level. Simply the ability to feed yourself, if you will, is primarily a processing issue. You got to be able to process, there's that food sitting there. My brain's got to tell me to use these fingers and pick it up and stick it in my mouth. That's not primarily a fine motor problem. That's primarily a processing problem. Okay? So, we identify what the priorities are at any given moment. We emphasize that, but a program is typically, could be 10, 20, 30 different specific activities with very specific frequencies and duration on each activity. You do this 4 times a day for a minute. You do this twice a day for 5 minutes. And it's very specific. And we outline it for the parents. We train them in the implementation of the program. We give them a coach to work with them every day. We have a portal where they put videos up showing us how they do things so we can modify it. We can train them. We modify how we're doing the program. They adjust the program. It's really an incredibly dynamic process. And if you will, at the foundation of that process is kind of my underlying personality. People assume, when I first started doing this work, people assumed, it's funny, it's kind of a statement relative to the field. People say, oh, you must be very patient to do this work. And I said, no, I'm not patient. I'm extremely impatient. All right? And I want change, and I want change fast. And if we're not producing it, we've got to change what we're doing. Mm-hmm. The lack of success has typically been attributed to the child. All right? So the perception has been, Johnny is not progressing because whatever was going on in Johnny's brain, and we don't know what that is, won't permit him to do better. The perception needs to be that the job is to change that brain, to provide those opportunities so that Johnny can progress. You know, to put it in perspective, you know, I've dealt with brain injured children that have had 90% of their brain destroyed, who we could teach to see and hear and process and speak and walk. All right, and if you will, kids on the spectrum are relatively easy compared to that.
Absolutely. And at any age, and I like to emphasize that over and over and over again, because what I see on the internet, and everybody says the same thing, oh, early intervention, which I 100% agree with, early intervention. However, that does not mean that you've tried, because if you're like me, I've done a lot of early intervention. Like I knew when my son was 15 months, something had changed, and got the diagnosis by 2 years, 4 months. And, you know, I was already starting the diet, was already starting everything I could find. But that doesn't mean that you found all the right programs. It doesn't even mean that the programs you did do didn't help to get them to where they need to be, whatever that looks like. However, does not matter the age when it talks to a program, or when you're thinking about a program like NACD, because like he said, the brain is constantly growing. The brain is capable of limitless growth. And so my last question to you is, you know, what kind of expectations can somebody really, you know, think could happen? You know, what do you think is going to happen with, at any age? What can they expect?
I think any parent with a child on the spectrum, their vision should be your child being a functional adult, independent, functional adult. And if that's your vision as a parent, as it should be, you want to make sure anyone working with your child has and shares that vision. Okay. It is very, very realistic. It's not a pipe dream. It's realistic. We've seen it happen over and over and over and over again. It can be. Right? And it needs to be.
And again, I want to emphasize again, the age wherever they're at, we can work with this child at any age. It may take a little bit longer, meaning it could be the 3, like let's say there's 3 on the processing, it might be 3.1 versus 4 right away. Yeah. Hey, anytime you have growth, that's what matters.
Yeah, and just, you know, to throw this in, neuroplasticity is there as long as you're breathing. You know, we have a program in southern Utah for adults with Down syndrome. You know, we've had adults with Down syndrome come in their 30s who are nonverbal, who in their 30s were teaching to talk and teaching to read. All right, you know, age does not mean that we do not have the foundation there to work with.
I love that. I mean, and the reason, obviously I'm biased by loving that because my son's 16 and I'm not giving up, right? Yeah. And by no means do I think 16 is really old, but I can tell you every birthday, and I'm sure a lot of families can feel the same way, it's a bittersweetness because, you know, for me, especially starting so long ago, I thought I'd be done by now. I'm like you. People always say, oh, you're so patient. No, I'm not. I want to be done. But it's, you know, we're not. And, you know, maybe that's why, you know, I'm still doing what I'm doing. Maybe I'm supposed to learn patience. I don't know.
No, don't do it. Don't do it.
But I really believe that at any age, our children, you know, can, like, I say it over and over again, they're capable of limitless growth. And that's my favorite saying from you. And I live it and I breathe it and I sleep it. I definitely have moments where I cry and I get scared. And I think that's normal for any family. And you get back up and you go, okay, let's get back in this ring and let's figure this out, because it really is a challenge and it's not easy every day by any means. But when you have those moments, like, and it could just be for that brief moment, and it's this huge victory, and you're just like, oh my gosh, okay, he's in there. I got this. I got this. And that makes you want to fight harder and faster and stronger because they're counting on us, you know, and, Absolutely. You know, thankful for people like you. Now, for people that are watching this and you're going, okay, I really, really wish that my significant other was watching this right now with me, or I really wish that my family was watching this. Super easy, guys. All you have to do is go to autismhopesummit.com. You can buy the whole summit, and Bob can be in your living room all the time. You can watch this over and over again. And it's so great because once you buy the summit, you can actually show your family. You can get everybody on board because we have over 25 of the top experts in autism and whatever their field is. And so we're here to help you guys. Now, here's the cool part about it. Not only do you get to get the summit, however, you also know that every time you're buying the summit, it's raising dollars for the Autism Hope Alliance, which goes back into our nutritional scholarship program. So that means we get to help even more families. So again, go to autismhopesummit.com, buy the summit. Bob can be in your living room, bedroom, wherever, well, that sounds funny, in your living room every day. And you guys can continue to learn that way and write down notes and all that good stuff. Now, Bob, I know you have an awesome free gift for all the families out there. It's 50% off of the download version of the Guide to Child Development and Education. The code should be in here. It's going to be Autism Summit, super easy. We love things that are discounted. Woohoo! How many of you guys love that? Because I love that. So again, 50% off. Again, all the information will be in there. Super appreciate your generosity for that. I can't believe how fast an hour goes with you. It's just, I feel like I could sit here and listen, and it's just, you know, I learned so much. For all the families, you know, that are watching right now, what is your final message you want to leave them with?
The parents, be in control, create the vision, do what you need to do, and make everyone involved with your child work to fulfill your vision.
I love that. And for everyone watching, again, hope is always there. And this is Hope with a Plan, giving you actual tools to implement that hope into your life. So until next time, bye guys.